Dr. Fletcher is the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs at the School of Ocean and Earth Science and Technology, or SOEST, at the University of Hawaii in Manoa. He is also a commissioner on the Hawaii Climate Change Commission. He has been the principal advisor in funding and awarding over 30 graduate research degrees, and has received a number of teaching, research, and community service awards. Chip also has a textbook on climate change entitled Climate Change, What the Science Tells Us. His models of sea level rise are used by government agencies to administer coastal policy and plan resilient infrastructure projects. So Dr. Fletcher is right at the center of this issue that is such concern to us all. And with that, I will ask Dr. Fletcher to give us a little summary of what he's learned recently in Glasgow. Thank you, Dr. Fletcher.
Thanks, everybody. Let me share screen and start just a couple of PowerPoint slides. So I'm calling this a climate update. I'm going to do just a few seconds of review and then bring us on to where we are today globally with respect to national commitments and pathways to limit global warming. So as most of you know, in 2015, the Paris Climate Accord occurred and nations agreed to stop global warming before it reached 2 degrees Celsius and to pursue efforts to end warming before reaching 1.5. But in 2018, a report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, labeled Global Warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius, revealed that warming above 1.5 would be a major disruptor to global security and economic stability. And with this report, 1.5 degrees C became the new global target for limiting warming. In order to stop warming at 1.5 degrees C, it means global emissions must be reduced 55% by the end of this decade and must reach net zero emissions by 2050. And I'll mention that to date, warming has reached between 1.1 and 1.3 degrees Celsius. So we're only a few tenths of a degree Celsius shy of our 1.5 target. By the end of the Glasgow meeting last month, national pledges, national promises to cut greenhouse gas emissions would only amount to reductions of 7.5%. Whereas 55% is what is needed. This gives us a 34% probability of staying below 2 degrees Celsius and only a 1.5% probability of staying below our primary target of 1.5 degrees Celsius. So we are way off. Additionally, a Washington Post study last month found that an average 23% of greenhouse gas emissions are not reported. Carbon dioxide emissions dipped 5.4% during 2020. However, they've rebounded this year 4.9%. And they're projected to reach over 36 billion tons of CO2 by the end of this year, which is only 0.8% below their pre-pandemic high in 2019. So this black line shows our historic carbon dioxide emissions over the past decade. This dip was the COVID recession. Our goal is to reduce emissions in order to stop warming. This yellow line shows the announced promises nationally, which would put us on a pathway of warming between 2.5 and 2.8 degrees Celsius. But what nations promise and what they actually do are two different things. Very few nations actually hold to their promises. And the policies that are in fact in play nationally around the world put us on a pathway of warming to over 3 degrees Celsius. Studies show that above 3 degrees Celsius, we're basically looking at 1/3 of humanity displaced from where they're located today because their lands will become too hot to live in. About 1/5 of the global land surface will become intolerably hot and not able to sustain human communities. This green line is the pathway we must follow in order to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. It's been projected that children born now will experience 2 to 7 times an increase in extreme weather events, compared to people born in 1960 under current promises. And this consists of 7.5 times as many heat waves. That is, whereas those of us born 50, 60, 70 years ago have experienced an average of 4 heat waves in our lives, children born today will see 30 heat waves. Already, 37% of warm season heat-related deaths are attributed to climate change. And extreme humid heat overall has more than doubled in frequency since 1979. It rained on the Greenland summit this summer. And this is the first sign of the Greenland ice sheet moving through a tipping point phase, because as it lowers in elevation due to melting and rainfall, the probability of rain begins to increase and the probability of snowfall decreases. The Amazon basin is now converted to a net greenhouse gas emitter. Studies have been coming out all year showing that damming of the rivers, wildfires, intentional fires, deforestation, hunting, mining, and drilling have all reduced the net biomass of the Amazon basin by nearly 1/3, and the Amazon itself overall is a net source of greenhouse gas every year. We also have seen studies that the continental biome is nearing its thermal maximum for photosynthesis. It's been projected that by 2040, just 2 decades from now, the drawdown of carbon from the atmosphere may be cut in half because of photosynthesis nearing its thermal maximum. But I remind you that crisis has a second, less well-known meaning from the original Greek. It actually means a turning point or an opportunity. There's never been as much innovation, investment, and interest in green technology. The revolution in renewables have soared from a niche interest 30 years ago to a cheap global alternative energy source that provides more than 1/4 of the world's electricity today. And this is truly one of humanity's most remarkable achievements. We're on the right path. We just need to accelerate. And with that, I thank you for your attention, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Fletcher. I think a lot of us on the call are aware of how dire the situation is. I appreciate your last note on opportunity. I wonder if we could ask you what you learned specifically in Glasgow, and how it has changed your views, if at all, since before the COP26.
Well, my main takeaway from Glasgow is that the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, which hosts these annual meetings called COPs, is fundamentally a political process. And the fundamental tool of politics is compromise. And compromise is not the right approach when it comes to safety. And we're talking about our children's safety, our own safety. None of us would ever compromise on safety. So while the COP process is an important and strong process, and every year does achieve wonderful things, I think that the organizers of COP need to put science first, and they need to actually focus on the developing world, the world which is converting to a modern system of health, modern system of transportation and education. And our funding should go towards India. It should go towards helping China. It should go towards helping African nations and Central American nations convert this decade into renewable economies, rather than nation by nation having to debate and eventually water down globally consistent agreements, because the COP process requires that every single nation that is a member agree to the wording. I would much rather see in global investment in the developing world. This will also help with human equality, which is extremely important.
And I'd also ask, what kinds of solutions can people on this call work on in their own lives to try to help?
Well, of course, there's voting. Absolutely, voting's the most important thing any of us can do in the democratized world. Secondly, a more plant-based diet is extremely important, and it's also better for you. It's healthier for you. And just flat out getting away from the consumption of beef, which is largely produced by the deforestation of biodiverse countries in the Southern Hemisphere. And thirdly, here in Hawaii, we have played an important global role as a leader, a demonstration of what is achievable. In the 2000s, we were the most oil-dependent state in the nation. And now we have emerged, and I think we may be the least oil-dependent, least fossil fuel-dependent state in the nation. I am personally excited about the possibility of changing our refinery from a coal and oil-based refinery to an atmospheric direct air capture refinery. We are a tourism-based economy. We spend billions of dollars on producing aviation fuel from crude oil that is brought in from Russia and Libya. And we could produce aviation fuel by directly pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, combining it with green hydrogen that we can produce, and making all of our fuels. We eventually will get away from combustion engines, but it's going to be more than a decade before long-haul aviation gets away from internal combustion. And in the meantime, I think we can invest in synthetic fuel production from direct air capture of CO2. And I went to Iceland after the COP meeting and looked at sequestration and geothermal and hydrothermal energy production there. I also, and I'll end with this, I think that geothermal is, we really need to look again at geothermal, figure out how to do it right, have a community-based, community benefit-oriented geothermal energy production system in Hawaii, because it can be done.
Thank you, Dr. Fletcher, for your comments, for your work in this field, and for coming to our session today. It's great to have you here as a keynote speaker, and appreciate you very much your being here. Thank you.
Thank you.